There are two major misconceptions that are playing out today that are significantly impacting people's health, especially when it comes to blood sugar and weight management. For some, when these two specific misconceptions are fixed, health can improve dramatically. The first misconception is that timing of when we eat doesn't matter. The second misconception is that as long as we don't overeat, what we eat doesn't matter. The other way of saying this that you may have heard is a calorie is a calorie. I want to discuss both of these and how the Master Blood Sugar program is designed to address these two issues. My name is Dr. Ryan Campbell. I'm a naturopathic physician and I have a primary care practice in Seattle, Washington. My hope is to pass along to you what I've learned in the past decade of practicing medicine, and in particular about what I've learned about how to best address issues of blood sugar and weight gain. Let's start by discussing the first of the two misconceptions. Number one, when we eat doesn't matter. To address this one, let's first start by giving a bit of background information to explain the effects of insulin on our body. This will be a gross oversimplification, but as far as this discussion and the day-to-day impacts, the finer details really don't matter. Insulin can be thought of as the hormone that helps us regulate our blood sugar. After a meal with carbohydrates, it helps deliver the glucose to the tissues for use and for storage as fat. So now that we have the basic sense of what insulin is doing in our body, let me show you the impact food timing can have on daily insulin levels. I will draw out 4 examples of how food timing alone can impact total daily insulin levels. So this first example is of someone eating 3 meals per day without snacking. So on this graph, I have insulin on the left side here, and at the bottom, abbreviation for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so when we eat breakfast, we get a rise in our insulin levels and then a decrease. And then again, when we eat lunch, it's going to go up and come down. And then again with dinner. And so we get these peaks that correspond to the meals that we're eating. So what happens though, when I shade underneath the graph here, this area underneath this curve represents the total amount of insulin that's released in the day. So let's compare this example. Let's call this one 3 meals. Let's compare that example to 3 meals plus snacks. So we're going to start again with our breakfast. It's going to come up, but then kind of mid-morning we're going to have another snack, and it's going to come down. We'll have a lunch, then a snack, and then dinner. And then a lot of us have a habit of having a snack after dinner, and then it comes down. So you can probably guess, as I start to shade underneath this graph, let me go ahead and do that. What you'll notice when we compare the 3 meals plus snacks to the area under the curve of the just 3 meals, you'll see that this is a lot more area underneath that curve. So the area represents the total amount of insulin that your body's exposed to in the day. So let's compare those two examples. So 3 meals plus snacks, that's a common way that a lot of people eat. Let's compare that to a 2-meal person. So say someone's in the habit of skipping breakfast because they're just not hungry. Then they have a single lunch and a dinner. So comparing a 2-meal person to the 3-meal plus snack, that's even more dramatic decrease of insulin. So this last example will be of a single meal per day. So the insulin is going to be low through breakfast, through lunch, and then we're going to get one spike at dinner. And we'll cover color underneath the curve there. So that's an extreme example of a 1 meal per day. But compare 1 meal to 2 meals to 3 meals plus snacks to just a 3-meal. What is interesting is that each of these individuals could be eating the same amount of total calories per day in similar meals, but because of the timing of when these individuals are eating, the total amount of insulin for the day can be dramatically different. But okay, you may be wondering why it matters. You can see that eating more frequently can increase the total amount of insulin produced in a day. Well, the higher and more frequent someone releases insulin, the greater the risk for becoming insulin resistant or less sensitive to the insulin you're releasing. When someone becomes insulin resistant, they require even more insulin to maintain blood sugar levels. Higher insulin feeds further into insulin resistance, so it becomes a feed-forward situation unless something changes. But how many of us grew up being told that we need to eat breakfast to start the day off right, whether we were hungry or not? That was certainly the impression I had growing up. Add that to the advice to eat frequently to keep from having low blood sugar, and over time, in some individuals, it can be disastrous. So, to correct misconception number 1, we need to say that timing of when we eat is very important, and I consider it as important as what we eat. Now let's move on to misconception number 2, which does involve what we eat. Misconception number 2 is that a calorie is a calorie. So this misconception essentially says that the types of foods you eat don't really matter as long as the energy balance is maintained. Meaning that as long as you move and exercise enough to burn the calories that you consume, you're good to go. Also stated as calories in, calories out. This misconception is as dangerous as the food timing misconception. The truth is that different macronutrients are handled differently by our bodies. Macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. I'm going to explain the difference in the same framework as the food timing misconception, which is how macronutrients affect insulin release. That different macronutrients trigger the release of insulin to different degrees. So carbohydrates are responsible for the majority of insulin release, followed by protein, and the last macronutrient, fat, doesn't trigger any release of insulin. So carbohydrates are the primary trigger for insulin release. So right off the bat, if you eat more carbohydrates, you will produce more insulin. Think about those initial drawings that showed the different total daily insulin in response to meals. Someone can influence the height of those peaks by increasing or decreasing the amount of carbohydrates. Therefore, there is a second tool for reducing the total daily insulin amount. The other major issue with a calorie is a calorie misconception is that within the category of carbohydrates, which includes sugar, is one carbohydrate in particular that has very unique effects on our body, and you've likely heard of it. The sugar is called fructose. It's a sugar contained in fruit. It makes up 50% of table sugar and about 55% of high fructose corn syrup. Fructose on its own triggers a very strong energy storage mechanism by inducing insulin resistance. In fact, it is the primary tool that animals use to help gain and store energy for winter hibernation or long migration. So think about the timing of the year when fruit is ripe. It's in the fall before the winter months. So it makes sense that evolutionarily animals would have developed this tool. So it also makes sense that animals, like humans, would also have this ability. The problem is with us humans is that we don't hibernate or burn that energy with long distance migration or experience prolonged periods of famine, thankfully. So, through fructose consumption, we are preparing our body for a hibernation that never happens. What would have been a survival benefit 100 years ago now is making us sick. So when you add the combined effect of detrimental food timing and consuming types of foods that contribute to high insulin and insulin resistance, you end up with an epidemic of obesity, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. All of these tie back to high insulin levels. So these two misconceptions, in my opinion, are behind the majority of the chronic disease that plagues us today. So far, we've talked about these two misconceptions and the bad outcomes that can come from them. The good news is that you can use these exact two concepts to your advantage by doing the opposite. By manipulating food timing and carbohydrate types and amounts, you can see powerful results. I've seen it over and over again in my practice when patients with obesity, hypertension, diabetes can pull these two levers. Amazing transformations have happened over relatively short periods of time. Significant weight loss, normalization of blood pressure, and discontinuation of blood sugar medications is really common. It's not to say that this path is always easy. What I love is how simple these concepts can be. If you know what day it is and what time it is, you can easily begin to implement a food timing strategy to improve your health. And also, If you begin to recognize which foods fall into which macronutrient category, recognizing if something is a carbohydrate, protein, or fat, you can begin to pull the second lever and reduce the amount of carbohydrates and thus reduce the insulin your body needs to maintain blood sugar. Combine these two concepts and the power of these tools compounds. Addressing these two misconceptions is what led me to put together the Master Blood Sugar program so that more people outside of the walls of my clinic could take advantage of these two powerful tools. The purpose of the program is to take you through a process that helps you learn about what is optimal for your body in regards to food timing and carbohydrate amount, and over an 8-week period, you're left with the framework to continue to adjust and refine your habits so that maintaining health becomes second nature. You become expert in your own body, and you can stop feeling like you are a victim of your genes or feeling guilty about your weight or blood sugar. It's not your fault. We have just been given some bad advice. I've made it my mission to try to change that. What I was taught in school and what I observe every day is that the body naturally wants to be healthy. And whatever your health looks like right now, your body is doing the best that it can with what it's given. You have the power to give it something different.